We're going to continue our series, our study, or however you want to look at that, our lessons in the book of Genesis, dealing with kind of big questions, big answers. We have, in the past couple of weeks, kind of bookend the I don't want to say the life, but the kind of the major pieces of Abraham's life, from the call from his father's house and the promise that was made. And we kind of went through those promises to the offering of Isaac, or the beginning to offer up Isaac, the culmination, if you would, of the strength of his faith. We skipped over a lot in between, and we're going to kind of look back at that as we talk tonight about something we've talked a little bit even about on Sunday morning, as well, even here, especially this past Sunday morning. We're talking about John the Baptist and Herod and Herodias and all that. But we're going to be talking about fear, shortcuts, and sin tonight. We're going to talk about the series of events that take place. Again, we're going backwards now, that had taken place in Abraham's life, and one including Lot there. And we're going to not spend a whole lot of time on each individual one, but collectively we want to see these. But, you know, if we have a good discussion, we'll stop and slow down, and we won't speed through it unnecessarily. We're going to start tonight in Genesis chapter 12. So I'll have the main verses for us on the screen behind me, but not all the verses. Genesis chapter 12. Again, this is going backwards. So this is the early part of the call of Abraham. And it's, as far as the order in Scripture goes, he's called away to leave his father's house and to go out. And then one of the very next things we have is this incident with him in Egypt. It seems like it's right away. It's probably years between him leaving his father's house and the event, but it happens quickly as far as verses go. So if you're in chapter 12, we're down in verse 10. It says, "Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there. The famine was severe in the land." So they had left the land of Canaan, and they had gone down into Egypt. Egypt was always a place to go for food. Why? The Nile River, right? So the Nile River, one of the largest, if not the largest river in the world, was a fertile ground, and they always had the means to raise crops. So that's going to play in later, right? When we talk about Jacob and his sons, and there's a famine, and they send the sons to Egypt, and lo and behold, there's Joseph, right? But there's a famine in the land. It's severe, so they head down to Egypt. Verse 11, "And it came to pass," and this is behind us as well, "when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai, his wife, 'Indeed, I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore it will happen when the Egyptians see you, that they will say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you.' So it was when Abram came into Egypt, the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. And the princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. And he treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, 'Why is it that you have done this to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go your way.' So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had." I have behind me verses 11 through 13 in this incident, and I think this is key to understand a little bit what happens now, as well as what happens is repeated at least one more time later. I have a feeling, though, this isn't the only time. Because look at what he says. "And it came to pass when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai, his wife, 'Indeed, I know that you're a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore it will happen when the Egyptians see you, that they say, It's his wife.'" What's he afraid of?
Somebody killed him and take her.
Right. They're afraid they're going to, want Sarai, so they kill Abram and take him. I'm not sure how this plan works. If you think logically through this plan, if this works, which it does at first, that means Abram walked into Egypt with Sarah, and Sarah becomes what? I don't know how his plan in his head was going to work. But we've talked about this element, this concept. We've talked about it on Wednesday night. We've talked a little bit about it on Sunday morning. This idea of fear. And fear does not lead to logical thinking. So he's afraid, and so the plan's working, but it's not working, is it? Because, he's getting blessed by these material things, but Pharaoh is now taking her to become one of his wives. God steps in, and what does he do to Pharaoh? He plagues his house. When he says plague and so forth, we're not talking about usually colorful language. We know God's very capable of sending plagues. What exactly and all they were dealing with, I don't know. But you would think also, someone might have wrote that down. About the plagues, because that's going to come back up in a few hundred years. But Pharaoh comes in. And it's crazy that you have this man of God, this man chosen to be the man of God, and you have this Egyptian Pharaoh who is everything other than the man of God. Yeah, right? He is a man of many gods. He is one who's going to see himself as a god. He is a man that has no interest, at least at this point, in the things of the true God. And yet he's a man that seems to, in this moment, have more integrity than Abraham. What was Abram's fault here? What was his shortcoming?
God had said he will bless those that bless him and curse those that curse him, and so he kind of lacked faith in that.
Yeah, he lacked faith and trust in God, didn't he?
Feared for his life, I worry.
Yeah, and it is easy to judge Abram on this side when we're not having to be in his shoes. But we need to see the fear element. He's afraid. And we do this all the time. Well, we will stop doing, not do, or do something different because we're afraid of an outcome. And that's not always bad. There is a place for fear and safety and things like that. But how often do we do something out of fear that the result is worse than if we would have just stuck to it? Abram, the result was going to be worse than if he just stuck it out, wasn't it? So the idea here of fear brings back up something we've looked at many times, how quickly it's associated with sin. So now he's got his wife telling a half-truth, and you're like, well, how do you know it's a half-truth? Because later when he talks to King Abimelech, however you want to pronounce his name, he's going to tell us that he not only said it here, but it was this custom that everywhere he went, this is what they said. And when he gets confronted by him, he's going to say, well, yeah, she's got the same father, but not the same mother. So we know she's actually his half-sister, and we might wince at that, but it was a half-truth. But a half-truth said to hide what?
Deception.
Yeah, to deceive, right? So it's all lie. We can tell something that's partially true in a context, but if we're using it to hide something more important, that's not good. And that's what Abraham did. The more important fact was that she was his wife. Okay? All right, so we see this incident. Let's go to the next chapter. We're going to bring Lot into the picture. We have Abraham that gets to inherit the land. God brings him up. He shows him all the land. But God has blessed him, and his herds and flocks have been growing, and so have Lot's. You get down to verse 8 in this chapter. Verse 7 says there was strife between the herdsmen over the flocks. Verse 8, so Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. We get that little note in there. Like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go towards Zoar. There are two descriptions there. One is like the Garden of Eden. I mean, that's how this place is described. So let's not kid ourselves. This was a beautiful place, right? The second is the land of Egypt going to Zoar. That's the land of Goshen. That's the area in which the children of Israel will later occupy. But it's a beautiful and lush and fertile ground. And that's what this area was. I want to keep looking at this. It's still in verse 11 this time. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. And Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. Now the very next verse is going to say, but the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. All right. We have a choice that comes up. And we're going to take and look at these briefly as stories, and we're going to come back and look at them as a whole, because they tell us a whole lot, both looking at the trees and looking at the forest, if you would. But in this case, there's something, and I'll come back to this later. Is there an obvious spiritual choice in the choices that were put in front of Lot? I would argue there's not. In other words, there's not a blatant choice that if you choose this as choosing wickedness and choosing this as choosing holiness. I think it's important for us to point out, because not everything we do always has this obvious, that's for God or against God. We have to be careful, because just because it's not obvious doesn't mean it won't be powerfully impacted. So, what's the very next verse that we read tell us about this beautiful place?
Sodom.
Yeah, in Sodom, it was extremely wicked. In other words, I don't think Abraham was setting up Lot. I don't think Abraham had this idea, hey, Lot, this is the world down here, you can choose it, or you can choose a rocky place, and that'll be more holy. I don't think that was their frame of mind. And we'll come back, like I said, to this, but I think we need to pause and make sure we realize that all of our choices will have impact. And we need to ask, how will this impact me spiritually? So just recently, we had a class meeting for our juniors at school as they're going to become seniors next year. And I do this every year, and we sit down and we, at least me, it's usually me, and then Mr. Basson does a part, and Mr. President Paulman does a part. And I said it, and then Paulman said it as well. It's like kids are thinking major, they're thinking school, they're thinking cost. And those things are very important. But then, okay, once you get on campus, what's it going to be like? Who are you going to be around? Most of the people you go to college, especially if you go to college and live on college, those are going to be the friends you have the rest of your life. They're going to be part of your wedding party. They might be the person you marry. Where is it that you're going to go to church? What is it that you're going to do? Your choice there is going to impact you. There's a story, it's actually one of David Paulman's stories, when he was, principal of a school, maybe Mobile, maybe down in Mount Moriah, I'm not sure. He had a student that was just bound and determined to go to this school in New Orleans. And he did that. He went to the visits and all that. He never asked about his spiritual things, about churches. Got down there. Had a hard time finding anybody who was interested in faith. and there was not a single church anywhere within driving distance. We've got to be careful when we make choices. They may not seem obvious at first, but they'll have an impact. And that's what we're seeing with Lot. And that's what we're seeing with Abram here throughout their life. It's not just, hey, well, this was a good thing, this was a bad thing. It'll carry forward. We'll talk about that a little bit more too. So we've got this set up for a story that's coming up. Abram has gone into the more rocky plain, or rocky area, the hillside. He has taken the lush land there in the valley, which is an interesting thought to me because there are already people who live here. But God gave this land to Abram, and he's saying, you choose. How strong and how powerful are these two as this family right now? Pretty strong. I mean, they're good. Basically, is it why isn't that property the people who live in Sodom or the people who live in Gomorrah or one of the other plain cities? How does Lot just get to go in there and take it or use it? Because that's how big and how powerful they are right now. So, there's a lot of things going on here. We'll come back to this one. We have Abraham who went to Egypt. He lied, tried to cover up something. Not smart in any way. Didn't work out well. Kind of did because God ended up blessing him anyway. But the scenario, God had to rescue him out of because there's no answer for Abram in that situation he created. You have this instance between Lot and Abram. And we're going to flash forward just a little bit. Well, actually quite a few years, but chapter 16. God has been promising this child. The child has not come. So, we're going to create a shortcut. We're going to help God out. So Sarah comes up with a plan. In verse 1 in chapter 16, it says, now Sarah, Abraham's wife, and I know it says Sarai, and I know it says Abram at this point, so I'm going to say Sarah and Abraham, and I apologize, but I'm not meaning to misspeak there. But now Sarai and Abram's wife had borne no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarah said to Abram, see now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her. And Abram heeded the voice of Sarah. And then Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, gave her to her husband, Abram, to be his wife, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. And then Sarai said to Abram, my wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me. And of course, if we continue this out, we're going to know that basically I'm going to end up kicking out Hagar and Ishmael as we go forward in the story and all this stuff. But shortcuts. Trying to help God out. And again, we point out these are people advanced in age. They are not in childbearing years. And Sarah comes up with a plan. We're going to help God out. Now, this is what often I think we do when we don't think God is capable or willing to do what he says he's going to do. We're not talking about a far-fetched plan that Abram and Sarah came up with on their own as far as having a child. God told them what? That she would have a child. Now, it's been years. It's been years. Sarah comes up with a plan. It's not happening. Can't happen. Won't happen. Here's my maidservant. Now, there's so many other side things we can talk about here. We go all the way back. I was in a conversation with someone who was very kind of agnostic type person, just kind of likes to argue about theology and things like that. And they were trying to say, well, everybody keeps saying that we should go back on marriage to what the Bible teaches. But the Bible is full of just abuse and misuse. And I'm like, yeah, because it's full of people. When people try to fix things, it doesn't work. So now Abram has taken Hagar, and they have a child together. And what ends up happening?
Sarah gets pregnant.
Well, eventually, she's going to get pregnant. But what happens between Hagar and Sarah?
Animosity.
Yeah. I mean, shocking, right? I mean,
Who saw that coming?
who would have saw that coming? I mean, I can't imagine. But here we are. So in the temporary moment of frustration and loss and whatever, they do something that permanently does what?
Changes everything.
It changes everything.
Now, we could do this. I've done this before. If you ever done they used to have a little silly thing, I think 7 Degrees or something like that of Kevin Bacon. You ever heard of that? Where it's like you name a movie and you can go connected by actors or titles 7 times and within 7 times and make it to Kevin Bacon. I think it's silly, but it's funny and it's fun sometimes. Things are connected. Who's Ishmael going to be? Yeah, those Midianites and so forth that carry off Joseph, the ones that they have to fight later. That whole group, the Arabian group that they've been warring even today, they're descendants of Ishmael. So this attempt at a solution not only is going to cause heartache and problems and stress, not only for Sarah, but for Hagar. I mean, she's going to almost die being out in the wilderness. God's going to have to intervene. Again, we don't have time to read all this, but you're going to have all these consequences that just continue on like a legacy. But it all started with what? Bad choice. The bad choice came out of frustration and not willing to trust, or trying to help God out, or trying to make a shortcut. I'm tired of paying the price I'm paying. I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of suffering as I wait. So I've got a solution. This will fix it. And the idea is my pain and my suffering will go away. And it doesn't. And in fact, for Sarah and then eventually Abraham too in this, did their suffering go away? No, their solution caused it to escalate, didn't it? All right, one more time. Let's jump to chapter 19. And we'll come back and talk about these in a little bit more of a broad sense. Latter part of 18, 2 angels come to visit, actually 3 men come to visit Abram. I believe the second one is the second member of the Godhead that we know as Jesus pre-birth, but people debate that. That's fine. I'm not going to argue about it, but it seems pretty obvious. He speaks as if he is God, and then he leaves, and the 2 others go into Sodom. So you have these 3 that go to Abram, and he fixes a meal for them, and all this, does all the hospitality. And the question is will we keep, this one speaking, what we're about to do from Abram? Well, or from Abraham. Well, they say no. And then chapter 18, the rest of the latter part is Abram arguing, debating, pleading with God about not destroying the city of the plains. Now, why did he want the cities of the plains destroyed? Yeah, because Lot lived there. Okay? He knew they were wicked. It's not like he was oblivious to that. But he did like the rest of us do. Your heart goes out to your family, people you care about. He knows Lot's there. And he starts off with 100, I think, or maybe 50. In verse 24, it says, suppose there were 50 righteous souls in the city. Would you spare it for 50? And he says, I wouldn't destroy it for 50. So that's down in verse 26. Then 27, then Abraham answered and said, indeed, now I who am but dust and ashes have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Yeah, just really, I'm humble. And I want to make sure I'm being humble about this. But verse 28, suppose there were 5 less than 50. So 45, would you destroy it? And he says, no. And verse 31, he says, "Indeed, now I have taken upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 should be found there. I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. Then he said, Let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak but once more. Suppose 10 should be found." Does Abraham know the situation here in Sodom? Yes, he knows the situation. But surely there are 10 righteous people in this city. Suppose 10 should be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. So the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. They're going to head on to Sodom. Now, this is an interesting story that if we were doing like a more study of the content rather than the bigger concepts, we spent a whole lot of time on. 10 people. Lot, his wife, he has 2 daughters, they have husbands. No, they don't have husbands, I'm sorry. So there's at least 4 there. I don't know if he has any sons, I don't know, whatever. Can't come up with 10? How bad had this place gotten?
Pretty bad.
Pretty bad. Okay? So chapter 19, then they're going to show up at the town. Now, there's a couple things that are interesting when they show up. Lot is at the gate. That means he's an official in the city. So Lot had gone from walking with Abram, pitching his tent outside the city, to now being at the gate, and we're going to know he's going to go take them to his house inside the city. What happened to Lot? You rub elbows long enough with whatever it is, sin, evil, however you want to look at it, what's going to happen? It's going to pull you in. So, despite the example he had in Abram, despite the things he had seen, despite all that he had been taught, he gets pulled into the city. And he is there. He has witnessed, obviously, a lot of this, but this becomes...
He did have some sons in the house.
I was thinking that.
And 2 daughters or some daughters. 14.
Thank you. Thank you. I just hit my head because of what he's going to do here in a second with a couple of his.
Confusing between the 2.
Yeah. So we're going to drop down. These 2 men come into the city, and they tell Lot. He kind of rushes them in the house. He knows what's up. He says, "No, we're just going to sleep in the open place." That is not uncommon for travelers. Lot says they can't do that. He knows the city. So they show up at his door. And they want to take these men and have their way with him. And I'll spare some of the details here as far as hopefully you understand what we're talking about. But this gets just completely horrible. There's no other way to say it. So Lot, this is down in verse 6, went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, "Please, my brethren," this is the crowd that has come to the door demanding these men be turned over to them. "Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See, now I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish." Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof. We went from walking with Abram, pitching our tent outside Sodom, to living in Sodom, to this wicked scene, and Lot's way out of it was to do what? We understand what he is offering. What does sin do? Deeply. And it puts us in situations where we have no good choices. Now, luckily, God is intervening because of the sake of Abram. I want to point out that we're interceding because of Abram. Lot in this situation, I know he's called righteous in another spot, but is he acting righteously right now? No. I mean, I guess you could say he's doing a good thing trying to protect these angels, whether he knows they're angels or not. I don't know. But he's not living righteously. He's living completely compromised to the point where he's offering up his daughters. Now, whether he was, and again, this is a little confusing because we see son-in-laws. Does he have more than these daughters? And he's offering up maybe the ones who aren't married? Or is he just saying this because he's trying to get out of the situation? I don't know, but there's no good way of interpreting this. Do you follow me? Again, with Abram, what good was going to be out of that deal to tell people that she was his sister? What good was going to come out of Pharaoh taking her as his wife? What good is going to come out of the situation of him trying to save these men this way? What happened?
The Lord had to intervene with blindness to the attackers. They wouldn't back it back.
Yeah. So God's going to intervene. I meant, what happened to these people? To Abram in Egypt, to Lot here in Sodom.
Well, they suffered for their sins.
Yeah. Okay.
They were not keeping their eyes on God. They were trying to help him. They were trying to take shortcuts and all that. So they lost sight of.
Yeah. They were trying to accomplish things out of their wisdom, and their wisdom wasn't very good wisdom, was it? All right, one more time. I said this was the last one, but one more, and I want to wrap this around. Chapter 20. We had the instance with Egypt and Pharaoh. We're going to replay it now with Abimelech, which is the king there in Canaan. So he's going to, verse 2, now Abraham said to Sarah his wife, she is my sister, and Abimelech king of Gerar sent him and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, indeed you're a dead man. God comes to Abimelech and says, you're a dead man, because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, so he hadn't done anything with her. Lord, will you slay a righteous man also? So he intercedes, and he's proclaiming this innocent. And then God, having intervened, saves the situation again. Look down at verse 11. This is as he's questioning, why would you do this thing to me? In verse 10, just like Pharaoh did. And Abraham said, because I thought surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will kill me on account of my wife. But indeed, she is truly my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. And it came to pass, when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, this is your kindness that you should do for me in every place. Wherever we go, say of me, he is my brother. What do you think about the righteousness of Abraham? I've done lessons just on this, and we will, Lord willing, at some point. I'm not giving an excuse for living unrighteously. I'm not giving an excuse for making bad choices. But Abraham did not do everything right.
He was a demon.
But what did he do right?
Obey that.
He constantly turned back to God. And that's the important part on the faith side. Let's ask a couple quick questions about some of the things we look at. Why are shortcuts so tempting? Whether it's trying to solve the problem of the no child, trying to lie out of danger. Why are shortcuts so tempting?
You said it earlier, frustration sometimes, but I think we all want the easy way. We don't want the hard way.
Yeah. not all shortcuts are inherently evil. I mean, if you learn a shortcut to get you from here to Atlanta, there's nothing evil about that. Well, not that I can think of, unless you're doing something different than traveling. We're talking about spiritual shortcuts, life shortcuts. We do this in school, maybe. A kid sees an opportunity to cheat, shortcut to what they want without the what? I think we like to avoid suffering, pain, hardship. So shortcuts often tempt us. It gets us to where we want without that. Remember, I mentioned this when we were talking about briefly the temptations in the wilderness with Jesus. That third temptation, when Satan offers him all the kingdoms of the world. I don't think he could deliver it, by the way. But Satan is the father of all lies. It doesn't bother him to lie. But what he offered him, remember, to be a temptation would mean he has to desire it. He desired all the nations of the world. What did he offer him? All the nations of the world without obedience to his Father and without the cross.
Sometimes shortcuts are the easy way.
Yeah. And so he tempted him with an easier way. And he said, no. And that's what we have to learn too. Every time Abraham tried to take a shortcut, it did not turn out well. He needed to, instead of taking a shortcut, trust God. And that's hard to do. It's easy on the other side of the story to look back and say, oh, Abram, but what about us? All right. How does fear influence our decision making?
Fear is not something that we enjoy.
It's true. I don't think, people might like that, going through the haunted house, that little rush or whatever. Not me, by the way. But fear.
I'm talking about fear of being afraid.
Yeah. We don't like it. It's not a pleasant thing. But how does it influence our decision making?
We don't think clearly when we're afraid sometimes.
We don't think clearly. We think short-sighted. We get protective. I put this just to it causes us not to fully trust in God. It leads us to try and manipulate situations towards the outcomes we desire. Fear can do a lot more than that, too. We don't have time to develop all that, but I've watched, and in sports, I know not everybody's a big sports person, but if you've been around sports at all, you might relate to this. There's a difference between playing, especially if you're ahead, to win or not to lose. And when you get into playing not to lose, you'll quickly find yourself probably losing. And there's just something about mentality that when we get defensive, we end up almost self-fulfilling that prophecy. The children of Israel in the wilderness, they got defensive. They didn't want to risk going into the land. And I want to just point out something. I think this is very important, and people don't hardly ever hear anybody say, what were they afraid would happen? They would die. What ends up happening to them? They die.
Without getting to them.
There you go. Never even got to see it. Never even got to see it. Instead, they die in the wilderness. It's really easy. So we can apply this to a lot of things. It's really easy as Christians to sometimes get defensive and think, I've got to protect. Which I do know there's a rule and a place and whatever for that. But instead of trust. It's on me to protect. That's the difference. Rather than trusting God to protect. And, I've seen it with congregations. We call, there's a term that's sometimes called sunsetting congregations. Have you heard that? They get to a certain point where they long ago gave up on growing, reaching out. They got into a defensive and basically were just waiting for the sun to go down on them. And you think, well, that just happens, whatever. No, it doesn't just happen. Somewhere along the line, they built up this concept that we can't do it. and we got to protect what we have. Well, what we have is eventually going to what? Self-fulfilling prophecy. Fear does not lead to good choices in most situations. Now, fear that someone might break in, you put an alarm on your house, that's reasonable. But when we're taking away from our trust in God, it doesn't lead to good things. All right. How do you keep fear, shortcuts, and sin from influencing our decisions? And we'll kind of wrap up with this one. I'm just going to put this up here. We need to ask, how do these decisions affect our spiritual walk with God? No matter what it is. The more we can do that, the better it will be. I cannot stand, and I'm going to apologize to you if you've used this term and you believe this is right. I'm just going to tell you where I'm at. I heard it when I first became a member of the church years and years ago. And I hear people say, well, that's spiritual things and that's secular things. It is so dangerous. Now, I'm not talking about worship, okay? I'm talking about life. What things of Abraham's life were spiritual and what were secular? What things of Lot's life were spiritual and what things were secular? Was his work secular? And so how did he end up in Sodom? See, it's all tied together. We can't just break things off and say, well, God doesn't care about that. That doesn't matter. No, those decisions in that thing may cause me to, harm my relationship with God or someone else. I've got to consider that. Again, I'm not talking about worship. Worship is a very distinct thing. I'm not saying that things in the secular world can become worship and people get crazy with that. That's not what I'm getting at. But when I live, I've got to live as a whole person trying to seek God. That means everything I do has to go through the frame of, how will this affect me? It's not the same as saying, well, this company I'm working for is a Christian company or secular company. No, when I show up at the job, can I be a Christian? Or can't I? Is this job going to allow me to be the Christian husband I need to be? Or keep me from it? The father? So those are the things that we've got to keep in mind as we're looking at things that come our way. And I think we need to learn that from Abram. If we don't learn it from Abram, if we don't learn it from Lot, guess where we're going to learn it? We're going to learn it from us being in their shoes, ending up with situations, hopefully not this bad, but in situations where we just don't really have a good choice. And hopefully God or someone else comes to help us. We'll be much better off learning it beforehand. We have gone pretty close to the hour, so I'm going to wrap up. But I do hope that we'll take consideration of the things that we've talked about and ultimately say, God's never asked for a blind trust. I think that's a misconcept because he said, faith is the ability to see things that are not seen. I get that. But he's never asked for a blind trust. And what I mean by that is he's shown himself time and time again to be trustworthy. There's plenty of evidence. We've got to learn to walk in that trust. And that's not always easy. But tonight, maybe that can be our encouragement. Can we trust God? Can we learn from those who didn't? Can we learn from moments even in our own life where we didn't? And seek to not repeat those, but to put our trust more in God. I think if we can give some thought to that, we do ourselves very good. But tonight, if there's someone here that maybe needs to respond to the gospel tonight, does not obey the gospel to this point, and needs to do so, or needs some prayers to the church, we want to extend an invitation if someone has need tonight. I can't remember, Walter, what number did you pick out for invitation song?
348.
Number 348. So Walter's going to lead us in number 348 as our invitation. If you have need, please let it be known.